Welcome to the year 2012. Everybody died because the Mayan calendar may or may not have ended. My archaeology professor back in the day said that the Mayans made new calendars after their previous ones expired, but what the f does he know? No, the world didn't end that year, even if it sometimes feels like it. But one entire media form did. Video games. Specifically on December 14th, 2012, when one underground film critic who went by the name Roger Ebert published his article stating that video games can never be art, in his opinion. Greetings, travelers. Video game discussion is weird. I would know. I'm a weirdo. I play video games and enjoy talking about them with my friends, especially when they would rather listen to me talk about literally anything else. Sometimes I love a game, sometimes I hate it, sometimes I like a game, but not as much as everybody else, and I'm left feeling as though I just couldn't see what they did. I still liked it though. And that can lead to some arguments of what we consider good and bad, but in the end, it's all fine. Because at the core of this discussion I forced them to have, against their will, is one simple truth. There is no such thing as objectively good game design. But before we get to that, we have to take a couple of steps back. Roger Ebert is not a household name anymore, so it might seem strange that I name-dropped him in the intro. Allow me to get anyone up to speed who's young enough to be locked out of the current job market. Ebert wrote for the Chicago Sun-Times. I believe they called those things news papier, where he was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for criticism, a pretty big deal in almost every journalistic circle, but even more so considering he was the first film critic to be bestowed such an honor. He also co-hosted Sneak Preview on PBS with Gene Siskel, a fellow film critic who worked at the Chicago Tribune. Then more famously, they co-hosted At the Movies with Siskel&Ebert, or as it would later be called, just Siskel&Ebert. They ended their reviews by giving either a thumbs up or a thumbs down, so if they were both in agreement, that would mean the movie was a 2 thumbs up. Which is how they invented the modern internet like and dislike buttons. I hope I don't need to tell you that's a joke. But the phrase, 2 thumbs up, is something you might have heard to refer to a piece of media being really good, and that phrase was popularized by At the Movies. Any brief description of Ebert's career and turning Siskel into a sidebar is not going to do either of them justice, but for the sake of this video, Roger Ebert was a highly respected, prolific, and decorated film critic. Little did he know that one innocent question would haunt him for the rest of his life. Can video games be art? To which he asserted, video games can never be art. This single quote is the event horizon that has warped video game discussion for years, whether or not you're aware of it. While the original quote exists somewhere out there in the ether, Ebert's follow-up article titled Video Games Can Never Be Art is what most people are consciously or unconsciously responding to when attempting to prove that video games are art. In this article, Ebert argues games cannot be art because there is no masterwork of the medium. No Sistine Chapel, no Toccata and Fugue in D minor, or Michelangelo or Bach who made them. And as soon as I read this article, it's like the entire universe finally came into focus. This obsession that people have had to hold up a magnum opus to definitively prove that video games are art, to Roger Ebert, a man who passed away in 2013. The thing that has kind of been lost amongst all the shadowboxing is Ebert's last, practically dismissive statement. He said while he'll never consider video games to be art, who cares? Chess players and athletes don't constantly ask him to view their craft as an art form. Why do gamers need to prove it to him? It's his opinion. Who gets to decide what art is? Jacob Geller, made a video titled, "Who's Afraid of Modern Art?" subtitle. One that really resonated with me because I too fuck up my audio balancing in videos. In it, Geller discusses modern art and its famous controversies as groups try to get artwork removed from museums for the crime of not being art in the first place. This video is really great because it repeats my own opinion back to me, and I love hearing someone tell me I'm right for 20 minutes. Truly, near everything can be considered art. Or, as I like to put it to make myself sound smarter, almost anything can be examined with an artistic lens. That doesn't mean all art needs to be held in high regard by everyone. There's a smug art critic with a raging hard-on ready to comment that by strongly disliking a piece of art, I only further validate its existence as art in the first place. And to that I say, put the hate boner away because I agree with you. While this is a definitional and semantic argument, I think it gets a lot easier to expand the definition of art to encompass almost anything, rather than trying to create some kind of hard line that separates the art from the shart. Of course, if you already find yourself with this opinion on art, it's not too much of a leap to say video games are art too. But while a lot of people say they want video games to be considered an art form, do they really want to accept everything that entails? The ultimate be-all, end-all truth of art. Subjectivity. We can never hold up a definitive, objective masterwork to prove a medium is art, because there is no such thing in the first place. I've struggled to make this video several times because I, too, have advocated for something being good or bad, objectively, and I've never had bad takes, which is why I never have to admit to mistakes. Only to realize I'm not talking about objective facts. I'm talking about subjective truths. In fact, it's the only thing we have, and that's a good thing. Because if objectively good art existed, and more importantly, by extension, if objectively good game design existed, then we would never get to talk about video games, which I love to do. It's not like math. We can't discuss whether 2 + 2 = 4. I mean, you can try, but it would just be wrong. That's why when someone attempts a convoluted proof to say otherwise, you know there's some kind of trickery going on, even if you can't exactly identify what it is. There would also be no reason to try anything new. The best game would just be the same thing copy and pasted over and over to oblivion, not that one. But wait, the first popular counterpoint cries out. It can't all be subjective. Video games are programs, and programs can be buggy or poorly optimized, or use a spacing format in the source code that I don't like. That's an objective metric. That's true, man, I made up in my head to get mad at. Video games find themselves in a unique intersection of technical skill, limitations, and creativity, also known as literally every artistic medium in human history. Now, people can still appreciate the technical skill or effort put into something. A large number of people can also come to an agreement that something is amazing. That's usually how something gets considered a masterpiece. None of that proves it's objectively good, though. I can still be impressed by the graphical fidelity achieved by the latest and not-so-greatest graphics processors, but that doesn't mean I think the games look good, or that I like them.
So as a human, I'll say this game looks incredibly expensive.
And the sooner you can get yourself to accept the inherent subjectivity of the matter, the sooner you can stop seeking validation from people who don't give a shit. I won't pretend to not know the reason Roger Ebert's words were taken so seriously. It is because he had significant influence. I can also make an educated guess as to why someone would ask him the question in the first place. People thought he would be on the side of games as an art form because he was a film critic, an art form that also fought hard to be taken seriously. Surely, he could have seen the parallels between the two. However, I'd argue it doesn't really matter if
society at large
believes video games to be a serious art form. If it comes to money, video games sell millions of copies and make companies billions of dollars that don't go to the people who actually make them. When it comes to popularity, gaming has only gotten bigger. When it comes to mainstream award shows, it has won. Universities offer degree programs for it. None of those things prove it's art, but I often wonder, what is it that people desire? For their aunt at the family dinner table to not look down on games and dismiss them as frivolous activities for children? Well, I think a lot of them are, and I still think of them as art. Granted, it's my own bias talking here. When people go down the masterwork route and hold up Shadow of the Colossus as the definitive example of video games as a work of art, I want to agree with them because I really like that game. Although, I don't think every game should be made that way. Somehow it feels like every game that's held up as high art is an over-the-shoulder camera game with a strong focus on narrative, when really it should be an isometric game instead. Now, of course, I love games with a ton of focus on narrative. That's how the world managed to convince me to overcome my hatred of Gachapon to play Limbus Company. But the idea that those experiences were strictly greater than the amount of time I've lost to Slay the Spire or Vampire Survivors, and continue to lose to them, doesn't sit super well with me. If the goal is to elevate the medium, I wouldn't want to leave the silly little experiences in the dust. Not every movie is super serious, but I'd still consider it cinema. Just because they were meant to be mindless fun or more of a purely game mechanical addiction machine, or were made without explicit artistic intent, doesn't invalidate them as art. If anything, it demonstrates the endless possibilities of video games as a medium. Which is probably not a satisfying answer. Saying whether or not something is considered art is just like your opinion, man. But I would say tons of stuff in our world is subjective. It does not make it illegitimate. This conflation of objectivity and validity has spread far and wide throughout the YouTube video essay algorithmic grouping system. It's strange how much more concerned people are with being right than making their point. A valid criticism is not one that is objectively true, it is one that explains its reasoning. Sometimes that process reveals more about the critic than the media itself. If you listen to all of a critic's points and think it doesn't add up, that's called agreeing to disagree.
I don't remember asking you a goddamn thing.
If you listen to a review that speaks to your own experience and then repeat back all the talking points without exploring it yourself, I think you're annoying. You can definitely use other people's ideas to foster your own, but repeating a claim from a critic and asserting it as fact is just wrong. Having a strong emotional response to a game and then trying to figure out how to put that into words is, hard. Sometimes it makes sense in your head, but later you realize your emotions were for a different reason altogether, but you can't go back and update your old opinion, and I'm projecting. It's like they said in the Bible, let he who is free of making sweeping generalizations cast the first stone. If you asked me a year ago, I would have told you that recycled content in video games is inoffensive at best. After playing Trails in the Sky, I realize it can be a massive positive. Familiarity is something that has been used in things like horror games, but I didn't really think it could work in the context of an RPG. But it turns out, it's such a good idea, you could make an entire game about it. But hey, that's the nature of being a critic. Realizing that your opinion can evolve over time as something challenges your biases. I think it's why it gets pretty sad when people treat video games as just a silly little thing to do on the side, while they listen to YouTube videos explaining them on their 12th monitor. It's good to engage with art, but I should be careful. I don't play every video game and fire every neuron in my brain. I do the same thing as everyone else who felt called out by my 13th monitor content comment. I have games I use as something to occupy my thoughts instead of figuring out where this video is going. It's easy to say everything in moderation, but someone who only uses games as the digital equivalent of bubble wrap are missing out on some really cool shit. People who only experience games as high art probably can't see anything with how far up their own ass they are. Though I shouldn't cast judgment out loud, I should just think that while I give them the side eye. To bring this back on topic, do you really want to accept video games as an art form? Are you willing to accept that it's impossible to claim something is universally bad? Would you be able to say that backtracking can be used to improve a game? It can definitely be utilized to pad out a game's runtime, but not always. Are some of the fundamental game design principles themselves perhaps Not as rigid as some believe? One that was on my mind recently was the idea that characters get stronger over time. Are there any that try to do the opposite? Games where the characters get weaker over time? The answer is yes. Hero Must Die Again and Super Brothers Sword and Sorcery come to mind, although I haven't finished either of them yet. I have played this little game called Trails in the Sky SC, where in the chapter in which the player has to give up the ability to cast spells by character one by one was super cool. Not sure how I'd feel over the course of the entire game, but it is a neat way to explore the idea of self-sacrifice for the greater good. Insert something about Lisa the Painful here. I could go down a whole list of ideas, but the general point I have to constantly remind myself of, it is best to be safe and not generalize because I never know when I'll experience something that makes me feel like a big dumb idiot for thinking one way. Nothing is 100% certain in every single context. Oh no, the existential crisis is setting in. If even the fundamental ideas for game design are up in the air, what do we even do? Can we like games that play it by the books? Alright, let's take some deep breaths. There's nothing wrong with using standardized principles of game design. If something is really cool and you like it, yeah, it's a good idea to try and use that as inspiration for a game. People do that all the time. They are not taking these ideas, though, because they think they are objectively good. They do it because they think it's good. Studying the history of video games and what they've tried is incredibly useful. Nobody wants to make a bad game. But Chair, how can you call it bad? Alright, you caught me in my own semantic trap. Bad in this context would refer to large chunks of people thinking the game wasn't good. But I'm so glad you brought up that line of thinking. If all you're concerned about is how the public will react to a video game, it's not that useful as a guiding force. Public opinion is already fickle enough as is. It's even easier to chalk up all bad decisions to suits who just want to guarantee a project will be successful, but I've seen plenty of indie games take the road of playing every single thing by the books to increase the chance of success from non-existent to non-existence times 2. Whenever I see it, I always think to myself, why are you even making an indie game? The big industry hasn't always been this way either. 20 years ago, it seemed like some companies understood that diversifying projects and creating as many unique experiences as possible gave them a greater chance of something catching on. Having 19 commercial failures that live on as cult classics for every big hitter is a decent business model, until it's not. There's something I want to say about how certain profit motives are antithetical to creativity, but I'll refrain from repeating myself in every YouTube video. Obviously, we live in the world we live in, and people do want to make a living, but the point I want to make is, do we really want to define the best games as whatever makes the most money? I guess Fortnite and Roblox are still the best games ever made. God knows my favorite game of all time barely sold any copies. Sales figures can point to what's popular, but it's not good for much else. I see people citing player count against Dawn Trail, yet it still has more active players than Heaven's Ward or Stormblood, so I guess you're saying it's better than all those expansions. Right? Do we want to define good as whatever has the highest aggregate review score? That doesn't mean you're going to like it, and the most out there games are going to challenge what prominent critics believe. Do we want to define good as what wins Game of the Year? I doubt that too. It's nice to see something I like getting recognition, but I would never take their word as gospel. By the same token, don't get too invested in what I like or dislike. I'm not the authority on what constitutes a good video game. Don't ask me my current opinion on any Tales of game unless you're ready to hear a stream of unending vitriol. It's funny that some of my favorite games are RPGs made in Japan, and yet I do not like the vast majority of them. I guess I have some kind of standards, however irrational and inconsistent they may be. Though if people are happy, I don't like to bring the mood down by telling them I secretly dislike their favorite game. One of my saddest fan interactions had someone gushing about crosscode and me trying not to ruin their life. Look, Traveler, It's got a lot of characters parodying annoying fuckwads in an MMORPG, when I already put too many hours into a real MMORPG with real annoying fuckwads. When I take a step back and look at this topic I wanted to make a video about, I asked myself, is it even really worth discussing this? Games as an art form? I'm probably preaching to the choir here. Is there anyone who believes in objectivity that will even watch this? I don't believe I'll be able to get every single person on my side and have them see the world the way I do. All I can hope is that people who are on the edges of media analysis on YouTube can be forced to stop and think for 1 second. To think why they actually like or dislike something, and not just outsource that process to somebody else. As the years go by, I feel as though we are dangerously close to normalizing some real backwards approaches to criticism. I'm not going to pretend to not know the reason why, but if I elaborate, this will become a very different kind of video, and I really don't want to think about what's going on in my country right now. This is what I use to distract myself. To tie all of these ideas into some kind of conclusion, art is a fundamentally subjective concept, in my opinion. Trying to prove to someone that video games are art is a fruitless endeavor, especially when that person would rather come up with as many excuses that they can think of rather than just saying, it's an art form that I don't like. But I'm not sure if I will always feel that way. Maybe 30 years down the line, some new technology comes out that I don't consider art. Alright, fine. I might as well do this here. AI art is not art, in my opinion. I never wanted to provide my own exact definition of art in this video, but for me, art has to be made by a person or persons. As soon as any part of the creative process is outsourced to a machine, it is no longer what art is about. Unfortunately, I've just created a new semantic hellscape of whatever the phrase creative process means. But stick with me. AI art is not art, because there can be no examination of the artistic intent, no understanding of how it relates to oneself, no connection I can form with the creator. It's made by people who have no respect for what art is. It's pretty amazing how much I believe nothing could ever change my stance, though unlike the invention of video games, I have my own doubts that AI will amount to anything. The big tech companies have spent so much time and money marketing it as it continues to be rejected by large chunks of society. It has a bad enough reputation that if a single asset in a video game is suspicious, it will taint the rest of the game no matter how much of it was made by a real person. AI art is a weird microcosm of everything I feel about art. There really is a group of people out there who believe you can take the inherent subjectivity of creation and instead pump out objectively good work from the predictive text machine. I know why businesses think that way, but I don't want to know why people do. Art is not just what gets the most praise and auctions at the highest price. It's everything made by the people. Hilariously, if these AI models didn't rip off all the people, and continue to rip them off, it never would have worked in the first place. So that's what I'd say is objectively not art, and I'm willing to guess that my take won't age poorly. Now let's get out there and play the only objectively good video game, Interactive Buddy. A big thank you, as always, to all the people who make this trite YouTube content possible, by either supporting me on Patreon or by sending me coffee money. If you would also like to support the channel, watching the video all the way through is already a big help, but money helps too.